Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. In yesterday's Take 5, I was talking about a miracle that took place, a miracle of a lady being raised from the dead in the book of Acts in an upper room through the agency of the Apostle Peter. And that was, as it were, a deliberate recreation, a reenactment of a similar miracle that had taken place in the Old Testament through the prophet Elisha, the raising from the dead of the Shunammite woman's son. Now, there's another miraculous event that took place in an upper room, and I'm not talking about the day of Pentecost right now. I'm talking about another raising of the dead that took place in the New Testament in an upper room, and that was in Acts chapter 20, whenever there was a young man, Eutychus, who basically fell asleep while Paul was preaching and fell out of the window, and Paul raised him from the dead. Now, interestingly enough, there's also another miraculous raising of the dead in an upper room in the Old Testament as well, and that was the prophet Elijah. The other one was Elisha. This one is Elijah in 1 Kings 17, where when Elijah was sheltering from the king's wrath at the house of the widow of Zarephath, there her son died, and Elijah raised him from the dead. So in both the Old Testament and in the New Testament, each of them has two miraculous occasions of people being raised from the dead while somebody, a man of God, was in the upper room. In the Old Testament, it's Elijah and Elisha, and in the New Testament, it's Peter and Paul that God uses to do this. Now, in that incident in Acts chapter 20, this young man, Eutychus, he was in the upper room, and the Bible tells us the lamps were burning. And that's a significant point because obviously ventilation was not good. They used oil lamps. They had a lot of people crowded into a room. It was late at night. They were having an extended meeting. Paul was a Pentecostal pastor, so he's preaching for a long time. And there in that upper room, that boy Eutychus was sat in the window. Now, many preachers have said maybe he was sat there because the room was so crowded he couldn't get a seat. But it's also quite possible that he was sat at the window because the fumes were so powerful he's trying to catch some fresh air. Nevertheless, he fell asleep. Now, it could be just normal tiredness, or it could have been carbon monoxide or whatever was coming off all those lamps and the crowded people and the lack of oxygen in the room. But Eutychus tumbled out of the window from that upstairs upper room, fell to the ground, and was killed. And the Apostle Paul, where everyone went rushing down, the Apostle Paul went with them, and Paul raised Eutychus from the dead. Now, I've often comforted myself by saying I might have sent people to sleep with my preaching, but I've never killed anybody. But then again, neither have I raised anybody from the dead straight after coming out of church from preaching a sermon. But the point that I really wanted to make here was this, that Eutychus's fall and death was actually caused by a health and safety issue. This is probably the first health and safety issue to do with a church service ever we come across in history. Whenever Eutychus was quite possibly overcome by fumes and fell out of that upstairs window. You know, there was a time when here in Ireland, we didn't think health and safety really applied to us as churches. We were just starting off. Churches we knew. There wasn't a lot of regulation. We'd rent a room. We'd hold a service. We wouldn't have planning permission. We wouldn't have fire certificates or any of that stuff. And then we began to realize we did need those things. Now, of course, we had a constitutional right to meet and gather for worship, but that doesn't mean that you are exempt from the regulations and safeguards that apply to everybody else in the country. And so we do have to comply with those reasonable safeguards. Thank God we only read about the incident with Eutychus happening the once in the New Testament. I would like to think that maybe the church learned a bit of common sense, that they had to take some basic requirements as well as trusting in the miraculous power of God. I have to say, as a pastor, we do care for the safety of the people in our services. We try to meet all the health and safety requirements because although we do serve a God who raises people from the dead, I don't think we can count on that every time if something goes wrong. But nevertheless, God overruled that situation and God raised somebody from the dead and did a mighty miracle that encouraged people's faith. And I just want to encourage you today that you might find yourself in a situation where something goes wrong and you realize that you were inadvertently didn't take precautions you needed to take. You could have prevented this thing from happening, and it's happened, and you feel like you want to beat yourself up, you feel condemned, everything else. You know, we should take all the precautions we can. But listen, if you do mess up, still call out to God and say, God, would you please come? Would you please come and fix things? Would you please come and break in with your power? God did it for Paul with Eutychus, and I believe God can do it again today. Hopefully the messes we find ourselves getting into aren't going to be as drastic as that young man getting killed. But I pray that whatever situation we find ourselves in, even if it's one of our own making, we can still call on God to come and intervene in Jesus' name. God bless you today. Have a great day. Join us again next time for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.